to protect our borders, and that is their job, and we see this as something that's in their life and they should be dealing with. With that in mind, we have supplied you a number of materials that we used during the debate, information we had during the debate in Congress on the federal bill. Included in that is a statement of our policy, which is quite lengthy, and I would invite you to look at it any time, and I'd be glad to answer questions at some point if you want that. Primarily, I want to call attention to a study done by our national staff that was compiled using information from USDA and the Department of Labor. And this information is aimed at agriculture on farm, not related to business, but on farm. And it was put together and run through the FAPRI model at the University of Missouri. That's the Food and Agricultural Policy Research Institute, and it's a well-recognized program. And there were some interesting things that came out of this, and I think some coincide with what you heard about, frankly, about the Rockefeller study, but some I think will give you maybe a little more in-depth on a national scale about some points that hopefully we can share some light. The detail as far as Arkansas specifically is somewhat limited, but I will share what I have on that. I would point out, as we look at this, think about agriculture over the last 100 years in rural areas, and one thing we all recognize is that people have migrated from the rural areas to the cities. So for much of the last century, we've had a migration of surplus labor from rural areas to urban areas. Now that's true until about the last 15 years, where labor needs have more or less stabilized at around 3 million people, 3 million workers in this country. Of that 3 million, 2 million are provided by farm operators and their families. And roughly a third, somewhere around 1 million or a little less, is provided by hired labor. So you see that our workforce, we are very dependent on labor in agriculture, and this is becoming even more true as we look at some crops, such as fruits and other things, where you have consumers demanding a quality, high-quality product that demands human dexterity and human judgment in the harvesting. Otherwise, mechanically, you get into damage, this kind of thing. So that has been an increasing part of agricultural operations in those fruits and vegetable production. And while those are more minor crops, I hate to use that term, but smaller production in Arkansas and some other states, that are important to us in various parts of our state. Labor is also important to our more traditional agriculture in this state, row crop and livestock production. We have been concerned as we look at the national legislation, because this issue of immigration is not a new issue. It's been there for a long time. The last time it was dealt with was some 22 years ago, I believe in 1985, I believe was the year, when the last bill, the one that we currently operate under, was passed. And I know at that time, I was employed with Farm Bureau. There were things that we wanted to see in that bill that we were unsuccessful in getting. Things that, frankly, I think would have helped us now and prevented us from being quite the situation that we're in now. I bring that up to simply say that we are in a situation that has developed for over decades, and it's a situation that we are concerned that we're careful about how we operate or how we handle getting out of that situation or improving our situation. And if you do some of these things that the federal government could, all at one time, and just wiped out major parts of the labor force in this country, then you would have some industry, you would have some repercussions on industries and the people of this country that are unintended consequences that are very real. I gave you a figure of 1 million workers in agriculture on farm in this country, hired labor. If the situation I talked about of a sudden removal or restriction of that labor force would result in somewhere, probably, the estimates are around half of that hired labor force would not be available. So you're talking in the neighborhood of 16, 17, 18% of the labor force could be impacted if something were done that operates that quickly. So we're very concerned about the impacts and how we get out of here. Let me make out of the situation. Let me make it clear. We do not support illegal immigration. in any way support that. But we do recognize that it has been going on in this country for a long time. It's important how we deal with it and that we think this thing through thoroughly. And we compliment you for taking the time to study this issue. The federal legislation that I've talked about, well, let me just back up and talk about the workforce. If we look at the national situation, and you were to do the things I've talked about, the question was asked, where would replacement labor come from? And that's a very good question. The model that we've included, the study we've included, that model tried to look at it. It made some assumptions that economists have to make, in that labor is fluid and it will flow from one job to the other. We also know that that's not entirely true, because nationally farm labor wage in this country is about $9.50 an hour. And maybe more higher than probably in some other parts of the country than it is here in Arkansas, but on average nationally is about $9.50 per hour. That is higher than the average wage for food preparation industry. And the food preparation industry is one of the industries that has a large enough workforce that we could compete with to draw out if we lost some of this migrant workforce. But they're already choosing not to come into agriculture when they're operating at are getting paid at a lower rate nationally, and that figure nationally is around $6.64 an hour. So we know that there's not total liquidity if we look at movement from one job to the other. Part of that is the distance from urban areas where this labor force is located out into the rural areas in some cases. That's just part of it. If we had to compete for that 15 to 18% that I talked about a moment ago, that were removed suddenly in farm production, we could see the estimates are that we would have to go to $11 an hour to as much as $14.50 an hour in order to bring labor back into farming to help deal with some of these jobs that are there. Now, that's a 13 to 48% increase in farm labor costs, which simply is not sustainable in most, if not all, of agriculture. We simply cannot sustain those rates. Now, there are other factors that weren't followed through in the study. I mean, you could have kept going with some of these assumptions. Actually, those numbers would, in some circumstances, be higher than what I just quoted. But 13 to 48% increase in farm labor costs and wages, again, is just simply not sustainable. So that is one of the things that we're concerned about, why we're concerned about how to go about this. The ag sector is dependent on hard labor has been increasing for several reasons, and I touched on that briefly. But there's some things you can't do very well with machinery. Some things require human dexterity and human judgment. And that's to look on a tree or a bush, going back to fruit crops, and pick that, let's say an apple that's ready to be picked, and leave the one that's not quite mature yet. The machine doesn't know the difference. It goes through and gets all of it. So you lose some value in there. The hand-picked brings as much as, I believe, as much as 50% higher cost and higher price. And what we're seeing is, and I don't have this number, but I recall from a previous conference I've been in, if you look at fruits and vegetables in this country, their value of production now matches the row crop, traditional row crop corn, soybeans, those kind of things as a crop in this country. So part of that is this value added from the quality factor, and that quality factor requires somebody on the ground doing that. And that is not going to be easily replaced. If you were going to do that and you were to develop technology to do that, if you could, you're probably looking at least 8, 10 years down the road. So we lost this labor force suddenly. We wouldn't have the lead time to bring that kind of technology in if we could develop it. And I say if we could develop it because agriculture is a rapid adopter of technology. If we have technology on the shelf that would save money, it's probably not used right now. Senator Glover, you know that from your area. So that technology to do these things that we now do by hand simply isn't there. With that in mind, the study has concluded, as you look at these points, that if we were to lose this labor force in agriculture, that farm income, and agriculture is fairly inelastic if you remember some of your economic classes, and something over half of its cost